Well, good afternoon, Porter.
Good afternoon.
Pleasure to welcome you here to Rollins. A lot of our students are anxious about their futures, and while we try and assure them that life has many elements of serendipity and random walk to career paths, they worry about the roadmap of their own professional lives and personal lives. And I thought we might begin by your telling us just a little bit about your story and how you came to go from your undergraduate degree to a random walk of professional lives of your own.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for your hospitality. It has been magnificent, one of the most beautiful settings for learning and thinking and enjoying company with people who have good thinking and good thoughts going on. It's been very valuable for me to have a little sort of time out and come here and find out that there is some wonderful new inspirational thinking going on in many sectors of the world that I normally don't get a chance to attend to. If I am supposed to be sort of the antidote to anxiety about your future career here, I guess my answer would be I never had a plan. I just sort of went from one challenge to the next, and it worked into sort of a career. And as I look back on it, I think how blessed I've been and how fortunate I've been in many ways, but some of it was luck I made for myself just by being interested in something and pursuing it to a point that it continued to interest me, and I got further and deeper into it. Times were a little different when I started out. Back in the late 50s and the 60s, we still had the draft in this country. So the first decision I had to make was, when I go in the military, do I want to go in and do my duty for a couple of years, or do I want to go in as an officer, longer period of time, bigger commitment, and maybe learn a little bit more about our military and what we do in the world through our military? And I decided that the military was something that I ought to know more about. And I don't come from necessarily a military family. But I did have a grandfather who served with distinction, and I'd heard stories. So I opted for the officer route and was in ROTC at Yale University, and that led to being identified in ROTC as a person who had a language capability, because I just happened to be majoring in ancient Greek. There's not a huge vocational opportunity out there, as far as I know, in the marketplace for pure ancient Greek majors, but it taught me a wonderful discipline and gave me a grounding in Romance languages, which helped me learn several other languages, which did help me in my career as I went along, the Romance language base particularly. And it certainly got me interested in other civilizations and other cultures. So even though there was no plan, it came together as a very enlightening time in my life and ended up with me being offered a job in Army intelligence in my officer career, which is a fascinating way to do Army service, military service, and it led to the Central Intelligence Agency deciding that maybe I should come and talk to them, and I did. And I had a wonderful 10 years with them, again, totally unplanned. I didn't even know there was a Central Intelligence Agency while I was in college for the most part, and learned a little bit about what they did and what the real world was about, and had some training from them. And then an event happened in my life. I got terribly ill, and I had not planned to get terribly ill, but I got terribly ill. And I came to Florida to try to decide what to do, because the doctor decided to go to a warm place if I wanted to get better, and said that would be the right thing to do. My wife and I decided there was only one warm place in reach, and that was Florida. We came here, started a new life. And I woke up one day after a little bit of convalescing down here and said, what would I like to do? And I said, you know, I've always been interested in newspapers and public opinion and how it's formed. Now I know a little bit about how it works overseas. How does it really work in our country? So I joined up with some of my friends and started a newspaper and several other small businesses. No plan, just happened. That led to some requests that I consider helping out with some public matters and some public service. For free, of course, not paid jobs. And I said, sure, and it ended up we got into a huge fight about the environment down in Southwest Florida where I live, in Sanibel Island. And the whole issue was, can we accommodate growth and preserve the environment at the same time, which is an issue facing Florida in a very big way. And Sanibel became a little bit of a template for a solution. And we found a way to do it. We actually incorporated Sanibel and made it into a city, which sounds counterproductive if you're trying to protect the environment of a wonderful island community that thrives on its natural resources and its sort of family type of orientation. And we set our own future and created our own city rules, and it became a model for how to manage growth in this country, because we hired people who knew how to do that, and they taught us, and we passed those laws. That caught the attention of some people in Florida who came to me because I'd been elected as the mayor as part of my penalty for having been very outspoken in how we would do this process. We had sort of an election at large. And I ended up with the most votes, so I said, then therefore you have to be the mayor. And I did that, and we set the city up and made it work. It turned out the governor of Florida took notice. At that time it was Bob Graham. There was a problem in our county, then Lee County, and he said, there's a problem in your county. Would you be willing to be a county commissioner? I need to appoint a county commissioner. There's an opening, and I said, sure. And that led to more exposure in local government. No plan whatever to ever want to be a county commissioner, believe me. I just did it. I learned an awful lot about the next round of problems. In the process of that, our congressman decided he was going to run for the Senate, so there was an opening in Congress, and some people said, you ought to think about that. And I did think about it, and I said, no, thank you. I don't think I want to leave Florida. I love it. And I got home that night, and my wife said, you know, you ought to think about that. That changed the equation immediately. Again, no plan, ever. She had never said a word to me about wanting to go to Washington, D.C. again. We ended up in Washington, D.C. I was a congressman for 16 years. My background in languages and intelligence and world policy stood me in good stead. My background in dealing with people on the front lines and public service, my background in the media, all came together, and I ended up in Washington in a very responsible job in the United States Congress, overseeing our national security apparatus, and then being drafted by President Bush, 43, George Bush, to run the Central Intelligence Community. And it was the community in those days, 15 individual agencies. Most of them have their own cabinet officers, hugely responsible job. And that gravitated eventually, as we reorganized the intelligence community, into just being the director of CIA, which is indeed a full-time job. So if there was a plan in there somewhere, I sure missed it. But what there was opportunity all the way along the line, because I had the discipline when I went to college to learn a language, to get involved in something I was interested in, and being involved in something you're interested in and enjoying your work is probably the happiest life you can have.
Outstanding. All from a Greek
all from
scholar
the
beginning.
Greeks. All from the Greeks. And
Well, you've had 3 sons who have followed somewhat different paths through Rollins.
Indeed.
And so I'm intrigued from the uniqueness of your own perspective and experiences. What would you think were the principal elements of a very good 21st century liberal education?
Well, I think for all of them, it was the flexibility. We're at an extraordinary time of change in the globe. It isn't just the technology, it's the amount of information flow that technology has provided us. And having the judgment of how to deal with that is really an important part to me of the educational process these days. I think all 3 of my children got a great grounding in how to deal with information, how to absorb a lot of information, how to multitask. I know I'm in the wrong generation to even use that word, but they seem to be equipped to go out in the world today, and not only the domestic world, the national world, the United States of America, but the global world. And I had one who is going back to teaching because he genuinely believes that teaching, bringing the next generation forward, is the best contribution he can make. He's good at it, he's a good coach, and he loves coaching and he loves teaching. And I couldn't be happier, because if there's a single area where the United States has to be preeminent, it has to be in education. And it turns out we're not at the top of the chart where we should be. So to have a son who is actually doing that is extremely rewarding to me, and I'm very proud of him. And I know the challenges he faces. We talk about it often, and they are very difficult. Anybody in your shoes or in this business of trying to inspire people, motivate people, and get them on the track of having the confidence and the interest to deal with the world as it is today is a wonderful challenge, and the results of satisfaction must be very real for you when you see those success stories happening. I have another son who has been in public administration, and all my children went on to get additional degrees. He became an economist. I think if you look back at his record at Rollins, you'll find that he did not do well in math, and he became one of the chief economists of the United States of America, which is not the reason we're having the problem, because he actually understands the problem. He's pointed it out to a lot of people who apparently either don't understand it or don't want to solve it. And his frustration has led him now, after years in Washington of working numbers and working for people like Paul Ryan, who are wonderful people trying to do the right thing, he has decided to run for Congress himself. We have an open seat down in the southwest part of the state. So he is, again, not following a plan he ever thought he was going to do, but he is out there with confidence, relying on his skills to do things he thinks this country needs, and that will be self-satisfying for him. My third child, he is more artistic. Went on to University of Virginia in Charlottesville and got a degree in landscape architecture, and has worked for a number of firms whose names you would know, prominent firms, worked overseas. Decided that he now has the confidence and the expertise and the background to go out and hang his own shingle, and he has just done that in Charlottesville, Virginia. So if you need landscape work done in Charlottesville, I've got a name for you. But these are three youngsters brought up on Sanibel Island, where I will admit our educational, the question of whether we could educate those kids on Sanibel Island as we decided to live there for our quality of life and our lifestyle. We weren't sure they'd get enough education. Fortunately, they did. They got into Rollins and they went on, and they have done just what I think you need to do in this world, and that is adapt to it and go forward with things you're interested and can do well.
Terrific. We've talked about how technology is thrusting changes upon the world at an increasingly fast pace, and I'm an unapologetic technologist, both acknowledging its opportunities and its challenges. Perhaps looking at it optimistically for a moment. I love the quote from Jefferson that there's no more democratizing force than knowledge, and that information is becoming freely available to much more of the world. It's much more difficult to control. Do you think that the technology that makes it so difficult to control information may signal the future end of despots and tyranny?
I think that the knowledge is a good thing in many ways. It's enabling people to make decisions and see things that they haven't seen before. The problem is, what can they do about it? And that's a little bit of a double-edged sword. But on balance, of course, you have to say that having knowledge is good for the human condition, because if there's a problem, there needs to be a solution, and the people most likely to come up with a solution are those most affected with the problem, who have the greatest need. So I think that even though this flow of knowledge has created this extraordinary, clear picture of the imbalance between the haves and the have-nots, between the United States of America and the impoverished poor areas where there's disease and all kinds of problem and no governance, even those problems are now more manifest and undoubtedly cause agitation for people and desire for change and hope. That's a human condition. The problem of how to go forward with that knowledge and make the right judgment seems to me today to be increasingly difficult. Who do you believe? How do you know which knowledge that is coming across your desk or in front of your eyes is the believable knowledge? You hear this or you hear that. Is it really true that this is the right solution, this is a good person, this is somebody trustworthy or not? It's a crisis of confidence that, frankly, even President Obama mentioned it in his State of the Union speech a couple of years ago. I was taken aback by it, because usually presidents don't mention things like that in State of the Union speeches. That was, I think, extremely aggressive of him and quite courageous of him to do. And he had said, our problem is people don't trust government. In fact, government doesn't trust government. You get one agency that doesn't trust the next agency. How do you do business on that basis? Well, if we're having those problems here among ourselves, just imagine what the rest of the world that isn't quite as educated or quite as had the benefits of civilization that we've had, institutional benefits of civilization, how are they coping with that problem, dealing with the myths and the legends of their culture, the traditions and the histories of their culture, which are absolutely wonderful for the last 2,000 years, but we're going forward for the next 2,000. So how they cope with that action element seems to me to be one of the great challenges of our educational system, because we are the world's superpower. We are looked to as the go-to guys. It isn't just for our military and our peacekeeping. It's we provide the aid, we provide the medicine, we provide the solutions, we provide the techniques. People ask about America for its help, for the opportunity of coming here. And that is a wonderful challenge for us to sustain. And frankly, I'm not sure we're not slipping a little bit in our response at these days.
You mentioned the media, and when you and I were growing up, there were limited choices. Only 3 major television stations and only a couple of truly national newspapers. And I think because there were limited choices, perhaps they took on a greater public responsibility in how they reported. But today, our students can self-censor. They have so many choices, they get to decide what it is they want to listen to and what they don't want to listen to. And you tend to go to places that reinforce your belief system, not challenge it. And the places that do challenge belief systems, the public debates, the open forums tend to be 2 very polarized views, 2 people shouting at each other, not really having informed debate. How does that affect, going back to a Jeffersonian quote, a strong democracy requires an informed and an engaged citizenry. How do young people today, how do any of us become informed, escaping these filters that, in which news has become more entertainment than it has been one of sort of broad content?
I don't know the answers to all those questions, but I certainly know that what I do when I try to wonder about the veracity or the credibility of something, I say, why am I reading this now? Who put this there? What was the agenda? What's going on here? Trying to look behind the words or the information that is coming at me. I think that's a very important discipline for people to have, because there, as you point out, are so many agendas and so many menus out there. It is such a rich smorgasbord of information. The natural tendency, I think, for people to pursue happiness, find something recreational rather than something that is sort of onerous to wade through, pretty obvious. And I think that, again, is another challenge for our educational system, is that there are just some disciplines you have to acquire as part of your educational growth, like memorization. I'm sorry, I know it's not pleasant, but you just have to do it. And I feel that this self-decision making will be rewarded in the end, and that students will learn that say if they make a lot of bad choices, they're going to get some bad results. If they make some right choices, they're going to get some good results. So I think the self-selective process will be a self-rewarding process, and smart kids are going to pick that up pretty quickly, because I notice kids haven't gotten any dumber. They certainly seem to be very quick to pick up many ways to multitask and end run. I have never seen a regulation in Congress or in school or in my own family where the kids haven't figured out a way to end run it quicker than I had thought of all the consequences of it.
In another area of technology, we see that the same technologies that allow us to, in physics, to develop things like nuclear power, in chemistry, and in biology, the genetic biotechnology revolution we're in, or in information technology and the digital age, it also opens new opportunities for self-destruction. The weapons of mass destruction or disruption are more easily accessible to more and more of the population. Do you think the world is no longer safe for war?
That's a very, very difficult question, and it requires having, it isn't the question of the capability, we can continue to develop and build ever more dramatic weapons, whether they're lasers or chemicals or pathogens or explosions that can probably destroy the Earth. It's the question of, have we got the ability to control the user? Can we, as a humanity, can humanity responsibly deal with the tools that it develops for itself and it's been given? And that's always been the challenge of civilization. If it's just one person on a desert island, the rules are really easy. It's whatever I want to do to survive, if that's what I want to do, is survive. When you get two people, you have to start making compromises. Well, when you get in a world today that has as many different agendas going on as this one does, and as many different aspirations and so forth, you've got to look at it not as a zero-sum game. If you look at a zero-sum game, then you just have conflict and war the whole way. So you constantly have to be inspiring leadership to look the next level up to say, how do we do this as a team? How do we coordinate together so that we both get something good out of this, as opposed to, I have to take something away from you so that I can survive. I think that the conditioning of all of the wonderful breakthroughs that we've seen, just think of our space program, the things we've brought back, think of the benign uses we've been able to put all of this stuff through, and the benefits to humanity. Such an easy answer, but don't forget 9/11. What was used in 9/11? An airliner, a benign piece of equipment that we use in our daily lives routinely now to get around the world and interface and provide cargo and trade and exchange and wealth and prosperity and happiness and drugs, all of a sudden becomes a weapon of atrocity. And it's in the user. It's all about the user. That means getting into men's minds. Will there always be crazies who want to do things to the point of self-destruction? The answer to that, unfortunately, is yes. That is a part of nature. Nature is imperfect, and now we're beginning to get up to the next level of questioning, what are your beliefs, and is the flag at the top of the pole really the United States of America, or is it the flag of God, which is what I was taught when I was in school? Where is your faith and where is your belief? If you believe, as I do, between good and evil, that good prevails, you believe that you will always have the opportunity to contain the mischief makers who will not destroy us. But it's an everyday 7/24 type challenge. And if you let your guard down, you will have more 9/11s because we know they're out there. Who would have thought a guy would put a bomb in his underwear on a Christmas day and fly into Detroit? How could you prepare for that? What logic is there? Is there any rationality at all to that? No. And you're asking me a rational question. I'm a rational human being. You're a rational human being. We're talking about somebody who isn't here. Right. We're talking about a crazy person over here.
Rollins has as a mission statement, educating for global citizenship and responsible leadership. So let's talk about that flag at the top of the flagpole. Right. Nation-state identity has been a central political agent for the last century or century and a half, maybe longer. Right. But the world is changing, and national boundaries, whether it's in the commercial world or in terms of mobility of our students and the younger generation, is becoming something where I think national identity is changing a bit. When we talk about global citizenship, do you think that there is a rising generation of young people who may actually be global citizens?
I think there will be. I think this is an evolutionary process. I think it will take time. I'm not sure we will ever overcome the familial instincts we have, and I'm not sure we should, or the tribal instincts we have. In the old days, it was very, very simple. You never went out of your valley because you couldn't look over the mountain, you couldn't go over the mountain, you couldn't see over the mountain. Now you can. All you do is look up at the satellite, it sees everything, and it brings it right back down to you. So when I grew up in a valley in Connecticut, and nobody ever left the valley. You were born in the valley, you were born in this place, you lived in the valley, you worked here, where your family worked, you died, and you were buried here. And this group of people buried you, and this group of people doctored you, and this was the school you went to. It was very simple. It was family, it was tribal, it was community, it was narrow, it was digestible, it was comprehensible. None of that applies anymore. Now we've gone global, and the sky literally is the limit. Now, what are the rules? Well, we don't even know the rules of engagement of our own military, overseas. So don't ask me what the rules of engagement are for the people who want to go international. On the other hand, if we don't get out of our valley, we're left behind because everybody else is leaving their valleys. So we're caught in this conundrum of having to go international. Some people who want to go international, which is right, go global. And that's something that I would encourage, applaud, stand up and say, more and more of this, please, because Americans tend to be a little insular. We may not know how well off we are. Probably most Americans don't until they've been out of this country and see some of the problems elsewhere and come back and say, thank God I'm home and I'm an American. I think that having those blessings tends to make us a little bit complacent at home and say, well, I get along in English, I don't need anything else, I don't need to learn another language. But there are other people overseas. Now, people overseas don't want to be seen through the lens of an American thinking everything is just like America. They need to be seen through the lens of who they are. And the only way you learn about who they are is if you go over and live there, speak their language, use their gestures, understand their culture. Don't be offensive by taking your shoes off or putting your shoes on, whichever the case may be, or eating this or not eating that, and so forth. All of those things are part of acquiring a global understanding. So whether we want to call it a global one world order, which is a dynamite radioactive word you would never use in Washington because you would immediately be drummed out of town for being anti-American, or whether we want to talk about global understanding is a way I would prefer to craft the language to say the better we craft the global understanding, the better we're able to operate as a globe that is working positively and peacefully in coordination, as opposed to a bunch of fighting tribes that suddenly came out of the valleys and are not interested in what they think. They just want to get them out of the way.
You are a strong proponent of all of us, Americans and students here in America alike, learning more about the principles underlying the Constitution
Very
and
much.
civil liberties that are embedded in it. And Rollins is an original signatory to a movement in higher education today to reintroduce a stronger sense of teaching of democratic values and civic engagement as part of a liberal education. Within the Constitution, we celebrate with almost religious zeal individual liberties and rights to privacy. Mm-hmm. Some of the countries globally that we compete against have more totalitarian governments that promote the broader public good, even at compromising the individual liberties, and they seem to be competing pretty well with us. Of course, there's always a question of who defines the broader public good. Mm-hmm. But how would you respond to the sort of the competition between the two democracies, the individual liberties versus the broader community interests?
Well, I guess if we're going to have a benign dictatorship, I would like to be the dictator, and I will decide what's benign, because I think my principles are exactly fine, and I think everybody should have my principles. Unfortunately, not everybody thinks that. And the great majority of the world has not had the benefit of our constitutional experiment of some 200 and whatever it is now, 25 years or so. And so they don't see this the way we do it all. We are talking about people who are generally, most of the world is used to a more authoritarian order of leadership at the top, of being told what to do. They don't worry about plans in a lot of places because the government has told them what they're going to do. This is the plan. These are the opportunities you have. You go to this, you get into this school, you get this education, or you don't. If you don't, this is what you do for the rest of your life. You dig coal over here. If you do, then you may go here, or you may be put into the engineer. We'll tell you where you go. Don't worry about it. This kind of authoritarianism has been reflected in democracy overseas in a sort of parliamentary form of government. Well, parliamentary form of government is not the system we use in the United States. We have our own constitutional form, and many people forget that. The problem with parliamentary form of government, as we try and apply it to the rest of the globe, and I'm not talking about those that are making it work properly now, is a concept of loyal opposition. If you're in power, it doesn't mean that everybody else who's not on your team is an opponent and is trying to get you, is trying to replace you. But if you are a despot and you're ruling by force, or you're ruling illegitimately, shall we say, or you would only be ruler by the fact that you have some kind of a control lever, that is undemocratic. So the concept of places that have developed or are developing a loyal opposition, so even though they're not in the power, they create a system of transfer of power which is not violent and which isn't based on rooting out the others and killing all of them and their children and offspring forever, sort of going back way to the early days of the written word on papyrus. Now we are trying to say, no, just because you're not in power doesn't mean you're worthless. Just because you lost your political race doesn't mean you haven't got something useful to say. It's getting the benefit of all of that and putting it together for the sovereignty, the nation, the globe, whatever the case may be. I think that is a tremendous challenge for people who are just now on the cusp of understanding internationalism, going global. I mean, that's a couple of layers out there. I would not expect that if I had this conversation with my children, they'd misunderstand it, but I don't think they would expect that their children, my grandchildren, are ready for that yet.
Well, we have struggled mightily as a country at nation building, that is, bringing democratic values and liberties to countries without that as a tradition, and how difficult it is to have that become part of their national culture. What parts of the world keep you up at night or wake you up at night worrying that they are the next places of instability, that our students will soon inherit a world filled with that kind of risk?
That's a great question, and I talked to two of your classes this morning. I had the privilege of doing that, and it was a lot of fun and an honor. And one, we were focused a little bit on Latin America, and one, we were focused a little bit on China. And sort of interesting question to look at from those two perspectives. In Latin America in the last century, last half of the last century, we went from a bunch of dictatorships to forms of democracy throughout Latin America. Now, they weren't democracy as we define it in the United States. It doesn't work perfectly. The human rights violations and measurements are not exactly the same. But it was huge progress. The institutions of civilization, the labor unions, the universities, the campesino federations, the newspapers, the business organizations, even the political parties after a while got together and understood that you just don't have to have everybody who is not in power be totally cast out from the system, that we can all participate. And Latin America, to me, is a success story, and we got a lot right. Now, I know I can find all kinds of exploitation arguments about Brand X and so forth, and United Fruit and everything else. When you go back and you look at it all put together, there was an evolutionary process that was inspired by us. We used our militarily properly, military-to-military instruction, not for combat purposes, but for nation building, as you say. And we got to those institutions in a very good way. I think that as the world's superpower, we are required to go out and try and help others who want to evolve towards what I will call the forces of good, emphasizing the values that we think are the right kind of values. Freedom, certainly the opportunity for individual advancement, pursuit of happiness. These are pretty universal things that most people would agree on. Yes, I'd like to be happy. Yes, I'd like to not have a lot of stress. I'd like to be healthy. I'd like to be free. I'd like to be able to say what I can. But they're sort of foreign thoughts in a lot of places because the dictatorships, the power authorities haven't let them happen. So conveying to people that it is not dangerous to your health to think that I would like to make a speech on the street corner is a very important sort of first step. We're seeing that process moving in China. We saw it in Tiananmen Square, and we can go right back through the communist system and the autocratic systems that have failed overseas. And it's what comes next after these autocracies go down or after the communist empire goes down. And frankly, the answer is still out on a lot of this happening. We are trying to shape and mold without interfering, without occupying. We're trying to say, look, here is a path. It's a good path. Take it if you want it. We'll help you down the path. We're not forcing you down the path. We're not in Iraq to tell you how to run your country. We're in Iraq to tell you that we'd like you to have the opportunity to run your country. And these are the things you could do to make it responsibly done. We're watching this Arab Spring. and we're getting into this whole subject of regime change, which is another area. But how we're going to go from some of these autocracies, these authoritarian societies, to a greater expression of freedom, an application of freedom by the population, by the citizenry of these countries, part of the evolutionary process where we have to lead without interfering. There are mischief makers. To go directly to your question, yes, there are bad people out there who really want to hurt us just because we are Americans, because of the things we believe, because of our separation of church and state, for whatever reason, because of our views about sanctity of life, because of our views about Christian compassion or Judeo-Christian compassion. These are anathema to them, their agendas and what they believe. Their answer is off the face of the earth. Now, to them it's the flat earth, of course, that they're going to knock us off. I would say right now that the people who are ideologically unstable, who would do irrational things to promote their agendas, even to the point of self-destruction, are our biggest worry. And identifying those people and making sure they do not get their hands on nuclear power or weapons of mass destruction or chemical biowarfare agents, identifying those people, because it's the user. It's not the fact that there's a bomb, it's the fact that somebody will use the bomb and could get their hands on it. That brings the intelligence question in very quickly. Do we have the capacity in our intelligence community to identify who those people are now, who the next ones coming down the road are, where are the crazies, and who's going to get control of these agents of destruction? I think that we need to beef up our intelligence dramatically. It's not anywhere near as good as it needs to be. Back when I was a kid, I was taught how to compete in rifle competition, aiming at targets, not at people or animals or anything living. It was just how to properly handle a firearm. And every time I missed a target, my instructor would say, "It's not the rifle, it's the nut behind the butt that missed the target." And it is. It's the nut behind the butt that we're working towards identifying and making sure they don't get their hands on the rifle. When I look now today, I think, okay, who could these people be? Well, the people running Iran today are causing a lot of mischief. The Ayatollah I would consider as a world class, absolutely in a class by himself, cunning, manipulative, deceiving troublemaker that is sincere about keeping himself and elevating himself in ever-increasing power and recreating to the greatest extent possible the glory days of the old caliphate. I truly believe that's what energizes. I also believe he has an instinct for self-preservation. So I think that is something that we can use against him, because I think he understands mutually assured destruction. So even if Iran gets the bomb, I don't think they would use it on us, because I think he understands he doesn't want to vaporize himself. However, the guys around him, I'm not so sure, who also might have access to that bomb, are having the same thoughts. They might really feel the way to paradise is to vaporize themselves. Those are the things I worry about at night that keep me up. Most of the great empires of the past, the colonial empires, they left a lot of messy places on the map. They drew lines, they got them wrong, they had the wrong tribes in the wrong places, the wrong ethnicities on the wrong side of the line. We end up with Kashmir, problems like that of great passion. And these people have long since retired back to their national countries, left us to sweep up the empires, and we're trying to sweep up and deal with problems like Kashmir. Kashmir is a hugely emotional problem for the Pakistanis. So who cares? Well, they've got a nuclear weapon. And who else wants Kashmir? Well, the Indians. And they've got nuclear weapons. So we have to keep those people talking logically and not emotionally, so that they don't let fly the nuclear weapons at each other, because the minute that happens, other people start feeling that they have to take sides and get involved. The Russians are notoriously helping out the Iranians and so forth. Chinese will have to make some tough decisions about their southwest border they're always worried about. You start looking at proliferation problems of capabilities, and the genie is out of the bottle on how to make nuclear weapons. I mean, the knowledge is out there. A.Q. Khan in Pakistan's a hero of the country, father of their bomb. Sold a bunch of stuff as a proliferator. It's an international criminal. He's the hero in Pakistan, but he's an international criminal. So now we have Gaddafi with ways to make weapons, and we have North Koreans, and we have the North Koreans selling it to the Syrians, Syrians building nuclear stuff, and we're taking out plants in Syria. All this stuff is going on. And there are identifiable enemies, declarations of war, clear players of patterns. The North Koreans are just a little bit crazy in a time warp and don't really know how to catch up and really not interested in catching up. They just want to stay in power, the dynasty of the Kim Il-sung. Not interested really in joining the real world at this point. They just want their world the way it is. Someday that will have to evolve. I could tell you the succession problem of Saudi Arabia is going to be worse than the succession problem in Egypt. Mubarak wanted to put his son in. There was obviously political backlash, a lot of manipulation, created some disturbance. This new technology comes in that nobody really understands very well. All of a sudden, my gosh, we've got all this stuff going on the internet and suddenly Mubarak isn't there anymore. Is that going to happen in Saudi Arabia? And if so, what's next in Saudi Arabia? Now, you have the Brotherhood in Egypt to worry about, the Muslim Brotherhood, whether they're sane or not, or whether they're going to follow all of the Salafist or one of the more radical elements of their belief, or whether or not they'll be responsible. Well, in Saudi Arabia, you've got the Wahhabi, and they are just as radical, if not more radical. And the question, if you take out the stabilizing factor, no matter the human rights violations of the present regime in Saudi Arabia, if you disrupt that, and those folks are 80 years old, they're going to die soon, who is next, and does the oil still flow? These are absolutely vital questions, and they are the kinds of things that make me wonder, can we blunder through yet another week, given the fact that we have not good policy, we have not the decision-making going on we need, we have not got all the capabilities we need out there. But we've got a lot of goodwill and a lot of good energy, and so basically I'm in a positive position. What keeps me up at night, makes me not sleep, is the thought of pathogens or chemical agents, even loose nukes, and there are a bunch unaccounted for, in the hands of a crazy. Because huge numbers in a population, concentrated populations in our country, become innocent victims instantly, and it's prolonged. It disrupts commerce. All of the traditional things that make our country run are immediately thrown into a tailspin. Just imagine 9/11. We stop doing the things we normally do because we're fearful. We self-restrain ourselves. Think about getting on an airplane now as opposed to how it was before 9/11. We create new ways to protect ourselves which restrict our liberties. We add costs to our day. We add 3 more agencies and cabinet officers in Washington to look out for us. How that's going to help us, I'm not sure, but seems to make the politicians happy. All of these things add up to using fear and anxiety as a weapon of terrorism. The ones that can come true are the ones we have to watch. And they're the ones that make me worry. We've had a near miss in Times Square. We've had a near miss in a Detroit airplane. We've had any number of plots that are so bizarre, putting explosives in your shoes. What's next? I can't think of all the what's next that are out there, and neither can you, as brilliant as you are, I don't think. And so that's what we're doing, is trying to be alert to the what's next, and what's next makes me worry.
If we turn our attention back to the United States for a final question, you mentioned the courageous recognition by Obama in his State of the Union address about this loss of trust in government, and having moved from a society of healthy skepticism to almost toxic cynicism toward government service.
Yep.
And that embedded in that also, I think, in higher education, we recognize is an implicit anti-intellectualism that comes with that. How do we turn it around? How do we educate young people for a world in which government service, community service, civic engagement, democratic values become a defining positive part of their lives, and help them move away from this kind of cynical rejection of all that we're trying to accomplish?
That is such an extraordinarily important question. Can I come back for another week and we'll work the answer out to that? I asked my son, the one who's running for Congress, I said, why in the world are you leaving your comfort zone? You know what it's like up there. You understand what's going to happen to you. If you're meaningful, people are going to be taking shots at you. They're going to be investigating your children. They're going to want to know what their grades are in school and, you know, who last misbehaved doing what. They're going to know all of your shenanigans at X Club at Rollins when you were there and all of these things that you don't necessarily want to talk about right now. Why in the world would you do this? And he said, well, some years ago, perhaps I wouldn't have, but now I understand what's at stake. So I guess if you can create an understanding of what's at stake for not just the United States of America, but this question about humanity. I mean, I have often boiled this down to a simple answer. I truly believe there is a mighty contest going on between good and evil. And I'm not being particularly religious here. I truly believe that there is. I think all of these people who have written about good and evil and written poetry and poems and fiction and fact about good and evil over the years are right. There is a good and there is an evil, and I believe good will triumph if people will get involved. And that's part of education. And when I said I didn't think our education system was quite measuring up to the task yet, it wasn't meant as a pejorative comment. It was meant as a challenge, because if you can't go to the United States of America for a solution these days, I don't know where you do go.
Very good. Well, Porter, thank you very much for joining us here at the Winter Park Institute.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
On behalf of the entire Rollins community, I want to thank you for your time and wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I can't tell you how much fun this has been for me.
Good.
And how inspiring. Very stimulating. You know, when you get to be my age and meet people who are thinking about this stuff and really doing something about it, it's a little different than just talking about it on the porch.
Well, come back and help us anytime.
Thank you, sir.